posterity. And I also need to, um,
To be playing one of those joyous, buoyant suites somehow. If I was going to dig into it, it felt like that was the one I wanted to do.
I agree. For those of you just joining us, some people joined a few minutes late. We are with Brian Manker. He's the principal cellist of l'Orchestre symphonique de Montreal, and he's a cellist in the new Orford Quartet faculty at McGill University Schulich School of Music. And he always teaches at Orford. That's his summer hangout.
Yeah, I do. This summer I was teaching at Orford, but in this room because everything was remote. But I was at Orford, so yeah.
That's awesome. Um, and it's so great that I think only the arts community could come up with this flexibility so soon. And for those of you that just joined us, Brian has mentioned that he chose the fifth suite because, first of all, the low register of the cello is highlighted in this piece, and what a treat that is for the ear and the player. And also, the sort of zeitgeist that we're in right now. Maybe the sixth suite isn't what people are feeling right now. In Vancouver, we have a air quality warning of 300 right now, and the earth is on fire. Society is on fire. um, it's
Yeah.
it's tough. So tell us more about these suites were written when? If people are brand new to this music, when were these pieces written and who wrote them?
20, so 300 years ago basically. And Bach was a court musician in Köthen, a town in what is now Germany, of course. And it's hard to exactly figure out why he wrote these suites. I mean, who he wrote them for. Presumably there was a cellist there that could play well, but there's not really any great record of any of that. um, and interestingly, I mean, there are six suites. It's very typical. There's sort of almost a tradition of having, there's the sonatas and partitas for violin. There are six of those. There's often sets of six. It's like six packs of beer,
Nice.
something like that. I don't know why, but they come in good. Yes.
That's
So,
awesome. Each a different flavor from Dieu du ciel.
yeah, and then Beethoven and Mozart are also writing quartets, and Haydn, they're writing sets of six quartets. It's a very common thing. So there are six cello suites, and they do actually increase in difficulty, technical difficulty for the cellist as you go through the suites, which is sort of fascinating. It's almost like he's writing a technical, treatise on the cello of the time. And there are some things in the cello writing, I think, that are very unique. Um, and you don't really things that you don't encounter before. So he's innovating technical things.
Hmm.
And the fifth suite, as I mentioned before, has a special tuning. It's also a transcription, actually, of a lute suite, the
Yes.
original lute suite, which is fascinating because there is you can hear the lute version, which has some small differences. There's more harmony because obviously a lute you can play more notes at the same time. So um, some of the harmony that of the cellists, we have to imagine what the harmony is because it's not really there. It's apparent, or it's implied. But in the lute version, you can actually hear what he had in mind, and that's interesting. And then the sixth suite, the one following this one, was written for a five-string cello, which has a higher string, so it's much brighter and more. It just has a higher timbre to it, and it's more brilliant and joyous, as I mentioned before.
And
This
it's in D major, the sixth one, isn't it?
major, yeah,
Yeah, already so much joy.
yeah, already very open tunings, and the brighter sounds of the instrument are coming up, whereas this one favors, I think, the darker sounds of the instrument.
Did you tune down? I know there's two tuning options for number five. Did you tune down?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people back in, sort of Casals, when he recorded, he's the first person that recorded these suites. When he recorded it with in a standard tuning. So that is in fact a transcription of Bach's version. And,
Mm.
uh, a lot of people played with that standard tuning. When I first learned the piece, I won't tell you how many years ago, but it wasn't 300 years ago, but it's some years ago that I first learned this piece. Uh, I learned it in the standard tuning. But there's something about the tuning that Bach chose that has this, like as I mentioned, this certain color and timbre to it, this special resonance that you cannot get in other tuning in the normal tuning. So,
And Um, you mentioned that this is like a treatise for the cello, and there are some innovations. Because I'm actually in a cello duo, where I'm learning a bunch of rep with a wonderful cellist in Vancouver. Hi, Judy. And we're learning Vivaldi's F major sonata, and the challenges are nothing like what Bach puts in these suites. And I'm wondering if you can. There, we do have some avid cellists watching. I think Jeannie Kim, your former student, is gonna tune in. Hi, Jeannie. Yes. So, what are some like for the cello geeks that are listening?
That leaps immediately to mind for me is in the third suite prelude. There's a passage in the middle which has this sort of variolage where you're playing three strings but sort of alternating. It's a very common sounding effect in violin playing, and also maybe in permeates some cello playing, but it was the first time you really encounter that. But then on top of that, because of the note selection that Bach is at, the notes that he's asking you to play, you really have very little choice but to use your thumb, which is rather unconventional, I think, at that time, and in low positions on the instrument. So that's something that even still, I mean, 300 years later, cellists are still, that's a challenging passage technically.
For sure.
Certainly one where he must have known that that was very hard to reach, or maybe almost unreachable, unless you were going to use this unusual kind of technique, which would have been very innovative. So that, for example, is one. I mean, there's other ones, and certainly in the sixth suite with the open strings and all these kind of variolage things that are happening there too, where you have a alternating of an open string and different things that he's using. Fascinating writing. It's fantastic.
And we feel the same. As I'm a pianist, and we feel the same with the keyboard writing that this just wasn't here before. These sort of patterns and expectations of us in the score, it just didn't. It just wasn't there. Now, we're educationally focused at Muse West Concerts, and I want to ask a few questions about what's your pedagogy behind teaching these suites? Which suite would you give a student who's kind of intermediate? They're ready for their first suite. Which one do you give them, and how do you teach these suites?
I think, as I mentioned, I think they do increase in difficulty. So to just go through them in order actually makes perfect sense. I mean, it's
Hmm.
just it just makes perfect sense. The first one certainly has challenges, but it's not as rich in terms of double stop problems where you're having to play two notes at the same time. There's a little bit of that, but it's a little bit simpler in that regard. There's a lot more available open strings to play in the first suite than there are in some of the other ones when you get into keys like E flat major, for example.
Hmm.
And the scale of it is just a little bit smaller. So that's really, to me, would be the place to start. I think the most important thing in teaching Bach for me is to try to um, cultivate awareness of harmony. Um, because there's so many clues in the harmony. I mean, I have this personal theory. I mean, it's based on nothing really other than, you know, the anecdotal evidence that Bach was a great improviser. That he's really, in effect,
True. It's true. I'm pretty sure it's true.
stories. But I mean, I wasn't there to hear it. But there's something about about his writing in these suites that it's almost like there's a harmonic progression like a jazz chart or like a figured bass, like in a continuo part, and then he's simply fleshing out everything with writing the notes. But in his mind, he has a scheme. He has a harmonic scheme when he's beginning to write all the other notes, and within each suite, in the first suite prelude, the first sort of destination where we go away from the main key, we go to E minor. And that happens in each movement in the suite, and that's like it's as if the jazz chart of the first of the prelude is also being used in the other movements. Not verbatim, but it's there. And that happens in
Mhm.
all of them. They each have this sort of sense that the movements have harmonic similarities and relations that I think are important.
And the listener can pick up on that. And I've always, you know, I'm pretty open to how people want to interpret these things, and I've heard wonderful historic performances of these cello suites on historical instruments, no end pin, Baroque bow. I don't know if you know Bailiang Ju, but she is a wonderful Baroque cellist. And she played those in Vancouver about 3 years ago. And I was moved completely. But I've also heard jazz transcriptions of the Goldberg variations. Um,
Exactly. It's so durable in that way. It can easily be played
yeah.
anything almost, because the music is so solid and so good. You know,
And how I think you also really like rock and blues music. I think,
pretty much anything. I mean, I'll listen to anything. I'm not snotty about that at all. It's all music to me. Yeah, for sure.
we need
Absolutely.
more of that in our industry.
There's music, there's types of music that I'm more drawn to, and there's things that I like maybe more than others, but I'll listen to absolutely anything. I mean, I'm really kind of omnivorous in that way,
That's awesome. And this music, I've had a chance to preview your concert. Our listeners are in for a treat when we premiere this concert on the 25th. I'm going to say that again, Friday, September 25th. Le vendredi 25 septembre, 21h à Montréal, 18h ici à Vancouver, 6 p.m. in Vancouver. And they're in for a treat. Can you tell us, how does playing unaccompanied music sort of match this pandemic experience? How did that fit for you?
Well, I mean, when all this happened, most of us, suddenly you're at home a lot and trying to figure out, well, how am I gonna keep any momentum going in my professional life, especially for musicians? It's just almost impossible at that moment.
Yeah.
My attitude was really just, okay, I'm gonna just work. I'm just gonna keep working at things. I'm gonna try to get better, so that when the door to the future opens again, I'll be better than I was when it closed, you know? Um, and part of that was just going back to things that I could, play myself, obviously. And because, my wife, Catherine, plays the piano, um, and violin, but, there's only so many ways you can collaborate. So it was
Hmm.
important to me to dig into some repertoire like Bach or unaccompanied things that I could, just
And Bach is always teaching us new things. Um, and how did you have any innovations for online teaching? How did you manage the online teaching? Because it's so hard. I've got my piano behind me, and like, I've got kids on keyboards that aren't even full size. It's a nightmare.
I'd have to say I think I've gotten better at. I don't know. I hope I've gotten better at it. At first, um, some of the normal things that you might respond to, like about the tone that somebody's producing, because of the interface and going through the internet and all that, you don't feel as confident commenting on those kinds of things, or
Mm-hmm.
anyway, because it's hard to tell exactly, because how's the microphone placed? Is that really a scratchy sound or a weak sound or a whatever, or is it just because of the way it's coming through? So that's harder to comment on. So it becomes actually slightly more visual to me, the teaching,
Hmm.
uh, noticing things about hand positions and you know bow strokes and things like that, that I think are are fundamental in a different way. So maybe the teaching strangely becomes a little less musical, but maybe more technical. And right now, that's like, it sort of suits this moment again, because again, if the idea is to come out when the door to the future opens stronger, well, let's work on the technical things, and let's just hammer that down, so that you really, so that the student really is in a good place, physically in harmony with the instrument. That makes sense.
That makes total sense. And there's a lot. I don't teach many advanced students. They're mostly within their first 2 to 3 years of study. So we worked on our wrists, our finger shape, because I could
Yeah.
see it. And we also worked on keeping in time.
Yeah, all those things. I mean, so I went back to a lot of basics, even with some students. I mean, even advanced ones, just sort of like, you could do this better if you just refined this one little area, and sometimes there are things that are global. There are little habits that are global that you start to notice somehow through the video in a different way than you do in person, or maybe because you're not noticing the other things. There's, like I said, you just don't feel like they're clear enough to comment on. That's tone quality or something like that.
That's
Uh,
right. We're going to go into a rapid fire round of questions. My first rapid fire question is, what are your two hot tips for auditioning?
well, obviously you have to be super prepared. You know, things have to be to the point where there's a certain automatic quality to just sitting down and playing,
Mm,
whatever excerpt it is. And I think knowing, especially because you're auditioning, you're usually talking about very clear, small excerpts of orchestral music. Knowing what the point is of the excerpt, what you're trying to show, what they're looking for in the excerpt. Again, often those are technical tasks, like can you bounce your bow at this speed, and then the other excerpt might be can you bounce your bow at this other speed, and then another one might be can you play legato, can you play with power. So just noticing what maybe and registering what the point of the excerpt, so that you're really addressing that issue and not getting off into the weeds about something like interpreting it necessarily. Does that make sense?
mhm. That's so true. If you were going to recommend to us three jazz albums to listen to on a desert island, jazz or blues, what would you send us to? We're going off the classical track a little bit here.
Sort of anything I mean, I like Miles Davis. There's some Bill Evans live album that I really like. I can't remember the name. BB King live at the Regal is fantastic.
Yes.
Some of those kinds of things are just wonderful. um yeah, I mean, there's lots, there's so much, it's so rich what's out there. Newer things, I mean, there's all kinds of uh, there's a guitarist John Scofield who sometimes is very interesting. There's lots of recordings of him. uh,
Hmm.
Another guitarist that I like is a young man, youngish, younger than me, named Julian Lage, Lage. It's also very interesting,
Awesome.
very
I'll have to
unusual
check those out.
sound. So many. Wes Montgomery, fantastic.
Oh, he's epic.
Yeah,
He's
I
so
actually
epic.
I like Miles Davis' Pharaoh's Dance, which is that crazy the album that's on is just crazy. It's weird, wonderful album. I love it.
Yeah, he really changed from the early 1950s to like late 70s. He went through a complete transformation, and it's pretty remarkable. Um, and last question that we ask everybody: what is your favorite part of going on tour? And you will go on tour again.
They're going on tour. Well, it sounds terrible. My favorite part is always coming home.
That's lovely.
but, but okay, let's talk about the tour part. Um, where it is. I mean, certainly seeing new things and is always is great, and just being in new places. Um, I'm not always so keen on the food experience. A lot of people like to do that. I like to see, the cities and the culture of wherever I am. So I might go to an art museum or a concert or something like that. I'm not always the Michelin guide food, type that goes to that.
That's Phil.
People that do that kind of, I mean, that's also great. Sometimes we've booked like short little like guided, hire a guide for an afternoon or something in a place that you don't know.
Hmm.
It just streamlines everything, if you have time. I mean, that's a thing that Catherine and I have done when we've been together on tour.
That's
If
fantastic.
touring in Canada, it's more just seeing the incredible, wealth of the environment that is, the beauty of the country. Um, and I've had the good fortune to have traveled pretty much all over the place, and it's a great country. I mean, it's just so much to see, and every region is unique. There's a unique spirit and culture everywhere you go. It's a remarkable country. It's wonderful.
We're very fortunate. And our last question for the rapid round is, um, did you go on the trip with the OSM to the north?
There were two trips. The first one I did not go on. The second one I did, and I have to say that trip, made me see the planet actually differently. It made me realize that where I live in Montreal, I'm in the south of the north. I'm not
Yeah.
in I'm in
No.
the I'm in the south of the north. There's a difference, and
Yes.
and the fragility of survival in a place like that, where if you don't cooperate with the other humans that you're living with, you won't survive. I mean, that's just very apparent, given the harshness of the climate and you're talking about tundra and the lack of resources, really. So, you know, I'll build a shelter. You go get some, polar bear or whatever, or caribou, and see if you can find some berries or something, and then we'll get together and share it. I mean,
Mhm.
how it has to work. There's no other way to survive. And so those communities have a different view of how they fit together and their place in the world, I think, than we forget, I think. It really was change. It was so beautiful. It changed my view. I have to say, amazing trip that was.
It's one of my goals as well um, to visit Canada's north. It's more expensive than I thought.
And it's honestly, it's not easy to travel there because for a variety of reasons. One of which is that there aren't just restaurants that you can go to. So you have to have somebody, you either have to go and, get food at the sort of co-op type stores and then cook it yourself, or have somebody prepare things for you. You have to really plan ahead. And it's something. It's really different.
I would like it. Thank you so much for your time today. We're going to stop going live in a minute and we'll just stay on for one more minute just for some last minute details. But for our audience, thank you for joining us for this edition of our podcast. Take note, we've been joined by Brian Manker of the Orchestre Symphonique de Montreal and the New Orford String Quartet, also faculty at McGill Schulich School of Music. And we are really looking forward to our first performance of our blended season of virtual and live at Muse West Concerts. And Brian will be playing the fifth cello suite by Bach, a really contemplative space for you to spend about 30 minutes quiet in your home, contemplation. Tickets are available on our website. We want to thank Tom Lee Music and 2X Education for sponsoring our microphone. Thank you so much, everyone, and merci, Brian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.